Okay, that may have got rid of the fog, but how do you make sure that it's the best and not the third in the list? Because only the best will get the money. Now, over the years, especially when I was working for the Ministry of Science, I was reading a lot of project proposals from scientists around Serbia. And I gradually realized that there were four main problems that Serbian scientists were having. And in discussion with colleagues elsewhere, I've realized that it's nothing special to Serbia. These are challenges that every person has when putting together any sort of project proposal. It's just that because I work here in Serbia, I was seeing only the Serbian project. So the 4 points are as follows. Irrespective of how intelligent they are, and of course, being scientists, we're extremely intelligent, people are unable to read and implement instructions. We're all dyslexic. It sounds silly, but not reading the instructions seems to be a very common problem. And it's not only in Serbia. I was talking to a lady in the European office in Newcastle University a couple of years ago, and she made me feel much happier about my scientists when she said, "Steve, you know, I have a big problem with my scientists here. They don't bother to read the instructions." So it's not a Serbian problem. Everybody has this problem. That's the first one. Then we have the second one. Statements are made without providing any evidence to support those statements, and as a result, the evaluators are not convinced. If you say you are the best in the Balkan region, for example, you've got to provide the evidence to justify your statement. Provide all the references, provide the list of all the projects you've had, provide the lists of all the visiting workers that you have hosted over the years. So you have to make sure that in your proposal you provide the evidence to justify your statements. The third one is insufficient details are given of the activities that are going to be carried out to convince the evaluators of impact. You saw those red steps going up between the two bars. Those steps define your project activities. If you don't define those activities with enough detail, how will the evaluators know that you know what to do? How will they know that you will get from down there to up there and not just sort of somewhere in there? Because too often projects have been funded in this part of Europe, I won't say only Serbia, but in this part of Europe, particularly in the early days Tempest projects. They were being funded to go from down here to up there, and at the end of the project, all they had managed to do was go up to there. Because in many cases, the activities were not clearly defined. So you've got to make sure that for your project proposal, you have enough detail for the activities. And the fourth problem is one that is true for everybody, and I struggle with the last one. That's being consistent. Being consistent, and it's a bit like writing a scientific paper where you have to be consistent with what you say in the tables, what you show in the figures, you have to describe in the text. Now, it's rather different with a project proposal because very often you have more pages of text. For Horizon 2020, you've got up to 70 pages of text available. One of the ones I wrote for FP7, that was 121 pages long. Now, it became a challenge for me to remember what I had typed on page 6 when I was describing the impact of our project on page 93, for example. So you've got to put in special effort to check for consistency every stage of your project proposal. Whenever you go back and you have to go back and think what you said earlier, to make sure it's consistent with what you're now saying. And I'll show you some examples of each of these now. So here's an example of not reading and implementing the instructions. Ensure that you do what they want you to do, not what you think would be a good idea. So they have prepared background documentation, they have prepared a form to be filled in, and you need to fill it in the way that they want you to fill it in. So the second part of this says, read the funding objectives, eligibility criteria, and the impact expected for projects, as well as the evaluation criteria. Because for every funding source, they will also tell you how your proposal is going to be evaluated. What are the evaluators going to be looking for? So you should be using that information as part of your guidelines on what you need to write. Because what you're writing is going to be evaluated by individuals, and they will decide whether you get the money or not. So, for example, if it says maximum length 1 page for a particular section, do not write 2 pages. And when I was working for the ministry, most of my scientists did write only 1 page. But I was getting the occasional proposal where there were 5 pages for that section. And I think the winner was somebody who wrote 13 pages for that section, which clearly said maximum length 1 page. And it also says excess pages ignored. If you read the instructions for the evaluators say the evaluators are required to ignore any pages over the stated limit for any section. So, if you have put in your major reason for getting the money into page 2 of a 1-page section, then the evaluators are supposed to throw away your page 2 and only read page 1. So it's important to read and implement the instructions. That should be easy to do, but it seems that a majority of people don't succeed. Here's another example of not reading and implementing the instructions, and that's particularly in regard to the expected impact. Now, this is an example where I say that it's implied instructions. They don't say word by word, you have to do this. But they do tell you that your project is expected to have particular impact. And here's a list of them from one of the FP7 programs, and I'll just look at the words in red. Long-lasting partnership with research groups elsewhere in Europe. Yes, that should be possible, because if you're developing collaborations, then you can write in how in the future you will develop joint study programs, joint collaborative research, and so on. Improvement of participation of the applicant in EU projects. Then again, you can write something because you can identify particular topics that are relevant for your area of research. The third one here says, improve research capacity for increased contribution to regional, economic and social development. Well, for some of us, that could be a challenge. How about Zorka? Would you be able to write something easily on regional, economic and social development? No, you see, many scientists would find this a challenge. If you're an X-ray crystallographer, or you work in some other strange laser something, being able to write something for that particular expected impact is going to be a challenge. So, think, what can I say? Well, yeah. So, I'm not going to bother. I can't think what to write, so you don't write anything. Well, you see, if you don't write anything for every one of their expected impacts, then you are unlikely to get the maximum score of 5 out of 5. And if you don't get 5 out of 5, your proposal will not be the best. And if your proposal is not the best, you probably will not get the money. So, if you have an expected impact for your project, then you have to write something for every part of that expected impact, however much of a challenge it might be. So, moving on to the second of those 4 problems, no evidence for statements. You've got to be intelligent in implementing the instructions. And I've got an example here taken from one of the policy documents. It's actually the work program document for FP7, one of the FP7 funding schemes. And it goes as follows. Blah, 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 which is generally boring, boring, boring. But what they actually mean is we want you to achieve close cooperation with at least 3 European outstanding partnering organizations. Now, there are only a few words there, and they've put some of those words in italics. And if I read it again, close cooperation with at least 3 European outstanding partnering organizations. Now, there is one word that to me is jumping out, shouting at me. Hello, I'm here. Write lots of words. Which is that word that's jumping out at me?
Positive or negative?
Molly?
Positive or negative?
Oh, any way you like.
Outstanding.
At least, no, not at 3. You've got it right. It is the word outstanding. Outstanding is not ordinary. Outstanding is not typical, it's not normal, it's not regular. So you've got to make sure that your partners are not just typical colleagues that could be anywhere in Europe doing some sort of research similar to yours. But these have got to be groups that you have specifically identified because their research is above the average. They are outstanding in the skills and the expertise that they can offer you for what you need for your development. So you've got to read all of these words very carefully to identify which are the words that I have to respond to in my proposal by writing some text. So you've got to get them. You can't invent what their qualities are, but you've got to get them to provide you a list of all their publications, all of their Nobel Prizes, if they have any, all of their patents, all of their visiting workers, all of their measures of esteem that show that they're not just average or ordinary, but they really are outstanding. And if you don't do that, then you risk losing points. Not sufficient detail. I've got 2 examples. I've made both of these up, so I haven't taken them from genuine proposals. But they do illustrate the point that I want to make about providing detail for the activities. And it's particularly the activities that I'm talking about. So give sufficient detail of the activities to define your histogram bars. And I've got 2 examples. The first one, this is 2 examples of a training visit to another institution somewhere. So one of our young R&D scientists will spend 1 month in project year 1 at Institute X in Paris to be trained in how to use an ABC machine. Now that would be very typical of the text that I would read for a training visit. So typically only 2 or 3 lines of text. Now if you compare that with the text that I've put underneath, admittedly there are more lines, there's more information there, it takes longer to type, but it provides much better quality information to justify that training visit. So I'll start with the text in blue. Our institute currently has no ABC machine, though we plan to buy one in project year 1, as it is essential to develop the diagnostic tests of Objective 4. And that is a statement of our needs analysis. We need to have that training visit. Then in black we have, thus one of our talented scientists will work in the Institute of Dr. X in Paris for 1 month immediately before commissioning the ABC machine. Dr. X has used ABC since 1999. So that's 15 years of experience using this particular machine. So this person ought to know how it works and ought to have sufficient experience to be able to provide training to others. And it goes on to say she has 2 machines, one of which is regularly used to train visiting workers. So not only does she have 15 years of experience, there are 2 machines available, and one of them is used regularly to train visitors. So they're used to giving training. The quality of the training ought to be good because of the level of experience. So that is now a description of the activity. Moving on to the text in red. Upon return to our institute, the young R&D scientists will help commission the new ABC machine and give training in its use to others to ensure dissemination and sustainability of the newly acquired expertise. This is providing a description of the impact that this is going to have. So the 2 texts are different in length, yes. But if you can compare the quality of the information that's provided, the second text makes it much clearer to the evaluators that the training visit is going to be, first, that it's needed, second, that it's going to be good quality training, and third, that it's going to be implemented after the scientist comes back from training, and it will contribute to maintaining the sustainability. So you've got to make sure that you define the activities with sufficient detail to convince the evaluators that your objectives will be achieved. I've got another example of not sufficient detail, and here again, those are my steps up the ladder. And if you think about a project is nothing more than a series of activities, little by little, going up the steps of that ladder from your starting point to your finishing point. And if you don't provide the evidence of making those vertical steps, then you'll never be able to convince the evaluators that you will get to where you say your impact is going to be. So that in graphical form is indicating how important it is for you to write enough detail to convince the evaluators. Finally, not consistent. Ensure consistency in what you say, and these are 2 examples from genuine proposals that I was sent by scientists. So if you give improvement of staff management skills as a project objective, make sure you describe the activities somewhere in your proposal to achieve those objectives. At the beginning, it was an objective. But once it got to the activities, it just disappeared. They had forgotten about it. There was another proposal where they were talking about website dissemination activity at the end, but they didn't refer to the project website that they were going to use for that activity. They mentioned it under dissemination, but they didn't have an activity to make it. So again, it's an example of lack of consistency, and you need to realize that for you, writing your proposal is going to take weeks or months from starting on page 1 to finishing on page 67 or whatever. So it's a challenge for you to remember what you wrote on page 1 and 2 by the time you've got to page 64 and 65. But the evaluators of your proposal, they're going to be reading from page 1 to page 67 in just a matter of 2 or 3 hours. So for them it will be easy for them to identify all the mistakes that you have written in, all the inconsistency that you have not noticed. So you've got to be very careful about this.